the COVID-19 pandemic is hurting South Africa's economy. With me is Thato Mashigo, a portfolio manager at Sanlam Private Wealth. Thank you very much for joining us, Thato. These jobless numbers. I saw the little note we've got here saying that it's only 5.25 million more unemployed compared to last week's 6.6 million. Is there any comfort to be taken from those figures?
Well, good morning, Chris. I'm sure you're familiar with that old phrase, when it's a recession, when you lose your job, it's a depression when I lose my job. So I suppose it depends who's asking. But the only comfort you can really take from it is that the 5.25 million is 20% less than the 6.6 million last week. But if we have to be realistic about the numbers, 22 million Americans have lost their jobs in the last 4 weeks, which is an extraordinary amount of people. So it's
Just give some idea of scale. I mean, that's 13% of all Americans, 22 million people. That's a nation on this continent. But do you think there's any sign at all that it may have turned the corner a little bit with this reduction in the number of people looking, unemployed people?
Well, the market is looking for any positive signs that it can find, and as bizarre as it may seem, this is somewhat of a positive sign. Yes, 13% of the labor force has lost their jobs and are now collecting unemployment insurance, which is all well and good as long as there's funding for that insurance in the short term. Many of them who may come in the coming weeks may not have access to as much government and unemployment line. So that obviously is a concern. How much savings do the people have? Interestingly, the Federal Reserve last year stated that around 12% of Americans could not fund an emergency $400 expense if it were to get them. And so that really does speak to the dire situation and the need for even further fiscal policy at the moment. So not a pretty picture at all. The market is trying to look on the bright side, as dim as that bright side may be, but the underlying data coming from the real economy is quite atrocious.
And just one other, couple of other big international stories, China and their contraction overnight. I mean, for this neck of the woods here in southern Africa, it's going to cause havoc. I mean, the amount of stuff I'm just going through the exports earlier, and I was researching for the show. I mean, we send them everything from gold, copper, aluminium, motor vehicles, spares, tobacco, wool, manganese, and they send back everything from televisions to kidney beans and groundnuts. How do you think we're going to feel the wind of this contraction in the Chinese economy, and for how long?
Well, China is indeed the world's factory. By corollary, countries like South Africa and the broad African continent are the major suppliers of raw materials to the planet, to the factory, which is China. And so when you see such a sharp and steep contraction in the Chinese economy, it doesn't bode well for us in the coming few months. If you were again to look at some green shoots, and the market is up today around 2%, or about 4% up for the week. So investors are generally trying to look at the green shoots. Certain companies have reported positive trading in China the past week. For instance, Bitcoin did mention that they're close to reaching full capacity again in terms of their operations in China. Tesla reported that pre-orders of vehicle sales in China are up about 200% off of February numbers, which is very positive as well. And a few weeks ago, Apple did reopen all of its ICE stores in China. So some small green shoots suggesting that things are starting to normalize, although it will be a gradual process. But the concern, of course, is that exports to the rest of the world coming from China are still going to be shut down because the rest of the world is, for all intents and purposes, shut down. So you really have to rely on the domestic consumer in China, and how quickly will consumer confidence return there. And we have to wait and see for that. But as far as we're concerned, unfortunately, in the short term, it's not a good sign for our base metal producers, our PGMs producers.
Which are kicking back into production this week. Actually, just another story. We're running a bit out of time here, but on the international front, President Macron of France, interesting interview he gave to the Financial Times overnight as well. He was saying that he thinks that Europe is going to unravel, European Union, if the richer countries don't help some of the poorer nations like Italy and Spain and Greece and what have you to survive this COVID-19. How likely do you think that is?
Well, Macron's interview was certainly a call to arms to the statesmen and women in Europe to come together and find a solution to the fiscal situation. So really the call is for a sort of neutralizing of debt, if you want to call it pandemic bonds, or issuing bonds that any country can receive funding from, and the liability is shared equally amongst all the European nations. Of course, the Northern Europeans, especially Germany and the Netherlands, object to this almost handing over your credit card to your sibling who may not be as fiscally responsible as you, in referring to the Southern Europeans as well. So there is a deep political divide. And what Macron is highlighting is if the European Union is not a political project, then nothing more than a customs union. We sell each other goods and services, but we're not really there for each other when it counts. And that's really what his call to arms is. And we have to wait and see exactly what becomes of the European project. Is it merely an economic market, or is it a deeper sense of European togetherness, a political project? And that's really what Macron is trying to drive towards. But at this stage, it remains quite uncertain. And if we look at how the euro has traded relative to the dollar the past few months, the market tends to agree that this may not end as well as he hopes it will.
Well, one of the many global views we're going to be taking into account here on CNBC Africa. Thank you very much indeed. That was Thato Mashigo, a portfolio manager. Sanlam Private Wealth. Going to a short break now. When we come